Hi everyone, and welcome back to my channel. Today I want to talk a bit about how I actually code, um, like what my workflow is, what tools do I use, and also how I make sure that it doesn't completely break everything. So first of all, my setup is actually very simple. I actually spend a lot of time in the command line. Um, And I like it because it's fast, it's minimal, and it makes me feel like more in control of my environment. There's also less distraction compared to full IDEs. And I can just focus on running scripts, managing files, and executing commands directly. Now, most of the coding I do is actually in Python, and it's one of the languages that can accommodate people from complete beginner to advanced users, which means that it's quite expressive and flexible. It's self-supported worldwide, and you can go from a small script to something so much bigger without changing like your whole mindset. And it's also really nice for experimenting, which is something I do a lot. And another thing, as a big part of my workflow is also Claude. Um, so that helps me to sort of like think to problems. Um, I don't necessarily copy paste, but I use it more so in the sense of generating code that would usually take so much longer. And what I do is I go through, first of all, the concept of what I need to do, what the structure should be, debugging that as well. So when I try to, I do try to build sort of like systems around that. So even if something goes wrong, I can recover and learn from it. Um, And one thing that I do in order to keep track of changes is I use version control, like Git, so that I can go back to earlier versions if something breaks. That way I'm not afraid to experiment because I know that I do have a safety net. I also use, of course, virtual environments to keep my projects sort of like isolated, and I manage dependencies to uh, with things like requirements or PyProject specifically for Python, but that helps me to avoid situations where something suddenly stops working or because of conflicting packages. And another thing of starting doing more of is using proper logging instead of just print statements. That way I can sort of like trace my code and see what happens step by step, especially when debugging more complex issues. So overall, my approach is sort of like less about trying to write perfect code from the start, but more so building a workflow where mistakes are expected, but they are controlled, traceable, and fixable, of course. And in which, of course, Cloud AI is actually probably, to be fair, probably the best tool so far for coding. But of course, that is also in terms of creating your own safety structures around that, um, examining that and everything else. So basically, how I code is mainly I do use the command line workflow. I use usually Python as my main language. I use Cloud and, of course, testing and verification with tools like pytest. So yeah, the key takeaway from all of this is don't be afraid of mistakes or messy code. That's part of the process. And what matters more is building a workflow where you can catch those issues, recover from them, and learn from what went wrong. Um, of course, testing is also very important, but it can never be fully exhaustive. And there will always be a case that you cannot think of. So that's why development is really about constant learning and iteration. You don't need to be perfect in order to be a good developer. You just need systems that helps you to sort of like keep you safe and to grow within. So thank you so much for watching. I hope that was interesting. I hope that you learned something new today, and take care.